process in preschool, and today's webinar will be presented by Kaitlin Connolly. Before we start, I'd like to go over a little housekeeping information. You can type your questions or make comments at any point throughout the presentation by typing your question into the question box on the right of your screen. If you can't see the question box, if you click on the orange arrow, it should open up the panel so that you'll be able to answer and ask any questions on the question box. And Kaitlin will be answering any questions you submit at the end of the presentation today. A copy of today's presentation, pre- and post-assessment quizzes, and the discussion board are available on KATC's online training site. If you did not receive the link and log into the training site, you can contact me. Here's my email address, and I will send the link to you. Additional time has also been given for today's webinar presentation. The Certificate of Attendance and Continuing Education credits, in order to earn those, you must be registered in our system as an attendee, and you also must complete all activities for the course, which includes the webinar, pre-assessment quiz, post-assessment quiz, and participate in the discussion board. This training has been approved for continuing education units by the following professional boards: the Effective Instructional Leadership for 3 hours, and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services Division Care is approved for 3 clock hours. So I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Kaitlin Connolly. Kaitlin has experience providing ABA and verbal therapy, behavior therapies to children with autism. She has a master's degree in elementary education, is working on her rank 1 in interdisciplinary early childhood education, and additionally she's completed coursework in applied behavior analysis at the Florida Institute of Technology. So I'd like to turn the presentation over to our presenter today, Kaitlin Connolly.
Hi, I'm so glad that somebody could join in, even though I had some technical difficulties earlier this week. While I start to introduce myself, if you don't mind to kind of introduce yourself, let me know what you do in early childhood education, if you have any experience in verbal behavior, if you're familiar with any verbal behavior programming or assessment, that will kind of help me know what to do, where to go with this. I hope I'm showing my screen now. I'm going to pull this up and just talk for a second, and then I'd love to hear more about you. Like she said, let me start this. I'm Kaitlin, and I teach 4th grade this year, but I also have experience in early childhood and in specifically ABA therapy. I did that for about a year, supervised a couple of ABA clinics here in Kentucky, really enjoyed that, but my heart is in the classroom and working with children, not necessarily in an administrative role. So I'm excited to be here today talking to you about using some of the tools that I came into contact with while working exclusively in applied behavior analysis, using those tools in an early childhood classroom, an early childhood environment. I think that they're really great and can be used for a variety of purposes. 2 of the tools that I'm going to talk about today are the VB-MAPP and the ABLLS. And I kind of wanted to know if you have any experience in using those tools, if you've seen them, heard of them, have access to them at your place of work, before I get started talking about those. So we will talk about today utilizing verbal behavior programming to streamline the RTI process. We're going to talk about what verbal behavior is, how it aligns to teaching strategic goals, how you can use it to design interventions, how to track skills, and get into how to track behavior data. I know that that's important as well when you're working with RTI. What I have noticed as I've been working in early childhood, especially working on my rank 1 in and out of different environments, doing observations, doing practicum hours. RTI tends to vary from school to school, and even within each classroom in a school. You can go into one Head Start center and every teacher is doing something different with their RTI data. That's the same in elementary schools too at times. You know, I've worked in an elementary school where the RTI process was very, very streamlined and everybody used the same interventions and the same data tracking sheets. And then I've also worked in a school where it was just up to you as a teacher. And there are, of course, positives and negatives to both of those aspects. But I think particularly when you are using an early intervention, it's very important to have a systematic and streamlined process that you're using versus just pulling random interventions, stopping and starting things. If you want to get results, you need to keep using the same types of interventions so that you can get those results. Sorry, I'm trying to read about your background information and talk at the same time, and I'm clearly not skilled in that. So Vanderbilt, and you focus on families and needs of ABA strategies. That's awesome. So you're probably familiar with ABLLS and with VB-MAPP, and hopefully I can give you some resources to give to your families, because I know that when I worked as an ABA therapist, I had so many families who wanted to use this at home, and it's so hard sometimes to really implement a great in-home program. So you might be able to take some of these resources back to your family. Anyway, we're going to talk about using ABLLS and VB-MAPP along with your teaching strategies goals. But verbal behavior is based on the work of B.F. Skinner, and basically you're teaching communication based on behavioral principles. So reinforcing those vocals that you want to hear, reinforcing skills to get the desired results. You have different operants that these assessment tools focus on. You have receptive, so being able to pick out a cup from an array of several different items. Imitation, being able to imitate what you're doing. If you're clapping, can the child imitate you and clap as well? If you say ball, will the child can imitate you and say ball? That kind of goes with the COEX. Manding or requesting items, taxing or labeling, and interverbals, which are essentially the building blocks of conversational skills. And then you also will use some discrete trial training when you're implementing verbal behavior programs. And that is very hard to teach somebody through a webinar, so I'm not going to get completely into that. I'm hoping that if you are listening to this as a recording, that you have access to some of that training in your school district in order to help you build these programs for kids. Two tools that I'm going to talk about today, in addition to using your teaching strategies goals, the VB-MAPP, which is the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment and Placement Program, and the ABLLS, which is Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills. So these are the two tools that I have the most experience with in verbal behavior programming. I think there are a few others out there, but these are your two basics that most ABA therapists are going to use. I found that they align very well with teaching strategies goals. And I'm not sure, since you work mainly with ABA, but teaching strategies goals is what we use here in Kentucky for tracking progress in preschool and early childhood environments. So our Head Starts use that, and public preschool programs use teaching strategies goals. And there are several objectives. I just went through, I think, the first 23 and aligned them with milestones in the VB-MAPP and TAP in the ABLLS. So this will be a good tool to give to teachers that you're working with to show them, hey, this is what our ABA program is working on, but it's also touching on your teaching strategies goals objectives too. So if you're looking at objective 3, for example, participating in group situations. In the VB-MAPP, you have social behavior and social play, classroom routines and group skills, and then in your ABLLS, you've got cooperation and reinforcer effectiveness, social interaction, group instruction, and classroom routines. Just quickly, in case you don't have this, I thought I would read through a few of these tasks and milestones that you might see. I'm in the VB-MAPP right now, and I'm looking at a level 2, which is 18 to 30 months. And I'm looking at classroom routines and group skills. Some of these milestones that they expect 18 to 30-month-olds to do would be sit at a group snack or lunch table without negative behavior for 3 minutes, put away personal items, line up, come to a table with just one verbal prompt, transition between classroom activities with no more than one prompt, sit in a small group for 5 minutes without disruptive behavior or attempting to leave, and sitting in a small group for 10 minutes, attending to the teacher or the material for 50% of the time, and responding to 5 of the teacher's demands. So they build on each other. You know, you're going to start with just maybe 3 minutes that you're sitting in a group situation and eventually build up to 10 minutes where, in addition to sitting there, you're also attending and responding to the teacher. So that takes it through a hierarchy and it builds on those steps. So if you have a child who, in your teaching strategies goal objectives, they're struggling to meet that, those are things you can work on. You can plug that into a program and build on those skills. In the back of the VB-MAPP, there's a task analysis that goes with each section, and I'm going to get a little more into that, but it gives more ideas for you to help you work on that. Switching over to the ABLLS, if I was going to look at group instruction, just to kind of compare and contrast the two. Sorry, a lot of clicking. And so you've got sitting appropriately in a small group, sitting appropriately in a large group, attending to teacher in a group, attending to student, following instructions, raising hand, taking turns, learning skills in a group format. These are all skills that the ABLLS says they have to be able to meet in order to participate cooperatively in the group situation. If you look at your, if you look at your resources, for whatever reason I cannot pull it up. Let's see. If you look at your resource page in the Moodle, you will find this document that is an alignment of the first 23 objectives and teaching strategies goals. It takes those and it aligns them with the VB-MAPP and the ABLLS. And as you can see right here, we have a few that the VB-MAPP doesn't go into. It doesn't discuss a lot of these gross and fine motor skills, but the ABLLS has more of those in it. My personal preference when I'm assessing a child for a verbal behavior program is the VB-MAPP. But as you look at this comparison, it appears that in this particular situation, if you are trying to use verbal behavior programming to align to teaching strategies goals, that you might want to get your hands on the ABLLS instead of the VB-MAPP. That it might be a little bit better and a little more aligned. Coming back over here, VB-MAPP is broken down into levels. You've got 1, 2, and 3, and it goes from 0 to 48 months. So pretty much the same as what you're looking at in teaching strategies, goals, and in a preschool environment. Within each level, you find these milestones for different skills and operands. So like I was just going through your classroom routines and group skills. That's a skill in level 2. And it's not a skill in level 1 because level 1 is 0 to 18 months, and it's not really appropriate to have those group skills with such little ones. But once they hit about 18 months, 2 years old, if they're in a daycare environment or an early Head Start, they probably are going to have some group time, or maybe it's just sitting at a lunch table, but it's still a group skill and they need to learn those things. Like I was saying earlier, in the back of your VB-MAPP is a task analysis of each of these items. So if I was looking at the classroom routines and group skills, and my child is not on level, they're not meeting those milestones, I can go to the back and find skills to work on to get them there. So it says, for classroom routines and group skills, in order to sit at a group snack or lunch table without negative behavior for 3 minutes, I should back it up to these things: adjusting to separation from parents, sitting at a snack or lunch table when physically prompted for a minute, lining up with other children when physically prompted, and demonstrating compliance for all of the classroom participants. So these are things that I would want to target to get them to where they're able to sit at a group snack or lunch table without negative behavior. So those are basically prerequisite skills that they say they should have. And there are prerequisites for all of the different milestones in the VB-MAPP, which is great for your small group instructions or your very individualized instruction that you're going to do with these children. There's also a barriers assessment for behavior. And I really like this when I'm working with a child whose negative behaviors are really having a negative impact on their ability to learn. So you can go through and it will give you as many behaviors as you could possibly think of under negative behaviors. Engages in some minor behaviors, but recovery is quick all the way down to often amidst severe negative behavior that is a danger to himself or others, like aggression or self-injury. You know, and these things are going to affect learning. If they're having such negative behavior that they're a danger to themselves or to others, they're not going to be able to learn anything. So you have to work on that behavior before you can do anything else. I wanted to show you on the VB-MAPP website, I just Googled VB-MAPP and the first thing that comes up is abbpress.com. There are several downloads that you can get. There is a list of IP goals that I thought was really cool. So if you're trying to come up with goals for a student's IEP or IFSP, these are some things that you could do, and it goes through each level. There's like 14 pages of these goals, which I think is awesome. I'm always looking for shortcuts, and this is definitely one of them. So if they're unable to match, then these are things that they say you start with: placing items in a container, using a form box, matching 10 identical objects, doing inset puzzles, matching in a messy array, matching non-identical pictures, and then working up to sorting colors and shapes. So I recommend looking into that for sure. Another thing, oops, sorry, my computer's not cooperating with me for whatever reason. I just pulled some pictures in case you don't have this or you haven't ever seen it. This will help you to see what it looks like. It's really colorful, which, I can appreciate that, but it's very easy to read. It's very easy to fill in. There's a scoring form, and in each milestone you have additional scoring where it explains very explicitly what the child has to do to meet that milestone. There's your task analysis that breaks down every little milestone, and then you have your barriers scoring form. Moving over to the ABLLS, this one is a lot more detailed, in my opinion. There are a ton of tasks, a ton of skills, and what I find myself doing is I will assess with the VB-MAPP, and then from there I'll look at my ABLLS and see additional skills, and that gives me ideas for skills and for different areas to target, because it really does break it down a lot better. And as I said earlier, it's a lot more aligned to your teaching strategies goals. So you will find more things in here to use as interventions with your kids who are struggling in your preschool class. So it's broken down into skill areas. There's A to Z. There's 26 different skills, and then each skill is broken down into a task. So as I was talking about earlier, the group instruction is M, letter M, and there are 12 tasks. So M8 is raise his hand to answer a question, and it goes through and it tells you the name of the task objective. So the objective of that is the student will be able to raise his hand to answer simple questions. The question that you're answering is, can the student raise his hand to answer a question? Example, raise your hand if you came to school on a bus. And so if they went on a bus, they would raise their hand then, and that would show that they are able to do that. Raise your hand if you want a chocolate chip cookie. So it's basically a yes or no response that you're trying to get there. And it spells that out for you exactly in the examples, which I think is so great. If this is your first experience with using a program like this, you're going to need those examples. And then you can move into maybe using the VB-MAPP where there aren't as many examples that are spelled out. And then it gives you a criteria, which is awesome. It tells you to get a 2, they can independently respond to questions. A 1 requires a gestural prompt for less than 50% of known questions. So if you know that they came to school on a bus and they didn't raise their hand and you had to prompt them for that, that's what that's talking about. So you know the answer to the question. You know that their shirt is red. If you say raise your hand if your shirt is red and they don't raise their hand, you can then provide a prompt. I probably wouldn't ask raise your hand if you want a chocolate chip cookie, because you might not know if the kid wants a chocolate chip cookie. You might not know those answers. So I would stick with known responses. And then, of course, a 0 would be they don't do it at all. So that is very helpful. It really breaks it down. And it has fine and gross motor skills, functional skills. It even includes toileting, which is awesome for these preschool classrooms. I wanted to show you, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. On your ABLLS, and I don't know if maybe, I think I have it in here later. So I'll come back to that in a minute. When we are developing interventions, so here's our situation. We're in our classroom, we've got this little girl, and we have an issue. She's 4, and she's not using language to express her thoughts and needs. She's just a level 2 on Objective 9A and Teaching Strategies Goals. So she's not where she needs to be. She is vocal, so she can speak, but she's only able to label or tax 10 items, which at age 4, their tax repertoire should be much greater than that. So what are we going to do? That's our situation. And we're thinking along the lines of using these two tools to help us design interventions for this child. First, we're going to look at our alignment grid for this area. And this is going to tell us where to go. So if we're using VB-MAPP, that's the first, well, actually the second column after your teaching strategy goals objective. And if we're using ABLLS, we're going to look at the very last column. So we've got spontaneous vocal behavior. Well, that's not really what we're looking at here. We're looking at tacting. So I'm going to look at levels 1, 2, and 3 of tacting. And I'm going to go in my VB-MAPP, and I'm going to start with level 1. That's a great place to start. Always start at the beginning and make sure that they can do everything before you plan an intervention. Don't just look at it and go, oh, I'm pretty sure they can do that. I'm pretty sure they can do that. Because you would be surprised, especially with kids who have disabilities. They're going to have those splinter skills where maybe they're really great at this, but they're lacking something that you didn't even think they'd be lacking. It just shocks you. So you need to make sure that she's able to do everything. And so is she able to tax 2 items? Yeah, she can do that. She can tax 4 items. She can tax 6 non-reinforcing items. She can do that. She can spontaneously tax 2 different items. Yeah. She can tax 10 items. That's where she maxes out. That's what she's able to do. So now I'm going to go to level 2. Tax 25 items when asked, what's that? So if you point to something and say, what's that? Is she going to say chair? No, she's not. She can only do 10. So that's where I need to start. I need to look at that objective and start there with that milestone and develop a skills tracking sheet with targets of things that she's going to tax. I would always start with things that are reinforcing. If she doesn't care about a lamp, why would you ask her about a lamp initially? Start asking her about her favorite toys. What's that? Oh, that's a Barbie. Or different items maybe in the housekeeping center, things that matter to her. Because, I mean, I don't really care too much about Star Wars, so I couldn't tax anything from the movie Star Wars. I don't know what the names of the ships are. I don't know what any, or if they are ships, whatever. I don't know anything about Star Wars. So starting there with me would get you nowhere. I'm not going to learn that. I'm not ever going to know anything about Star Wars. But if you started teaching me about clothing and getting me to tax clothes, that would be really easy for me because I love to shop. Just like that with our kids. Think about things that are reinforcing to them. And then you will do the same thing with your ABLLS if you're using ABLLS. So, like I just went through the VB-MAPP, she's unable to start or to tax 25 items, so that's where you're going to start. In your ABLLS, she's able to do G1, which is labeling reinforcers, but she's unable to label common objects. And the objective for that is at least 100 objects which are commonly found in their environment. Just like with me, stuff from Star Wars is not commonly found in my environment. But you're going to find shoes in my environment, you're going to find clothes, you're going to find nail polish, you're going to find hair products. Those are things that you would want to get me to tax. With your kids, it might be different types of cars, different types of dolls in the housekeeping center, different types of food in the housekeeping center. And if you have different puzzles, different things that they see in those puzzles, you can tax objects from a TV show, knowing those characters in TV shows, things that they are interested in. That is going to be key when you are first starting to work with a child. So now you're going to choose those targets and record them on a tracking sheet. This is probably my favorite website, and I have printed out all of these tracking sheets because they're so awesome. This is called trackingsheet.net. And these are lists of skills targets that you can use for all of the different tasks in ABLLS. And you can also tweak it if you're using VB-MAPP. So I'm in G, which means I'm going to go here to G, labeling. You can pull up an editable version. So if you just want to be able to type it in on this, you can do that. I also included a skills tracking sheet. I think it's in a PDF format, though, where you could print it out and handwrite them in. But if you wanted to type yours, you can use this. So I'm just going to click here. And again, this is going to give me a PDF that it tells me G2, which is what I'm looking at here, labels common objects. And it is giving me a list of common objects that I'm going to use. Now, I'm going to think about my classroom. I'm probably not going to have some of these things in my classroom for these kids to look at and really be able to tack appropriately. Like I might not have laundry detergent. But what I could do is I could save my thing of laundry detergent from home, clean it out, bring it in, put it in the housekeeping center, and use that to help her play with it in an appropriate way and teach her what it is. But you're definitely going to be able to tack clothing, school items like backpacks, crayons, pencils, markers, scissors, glue. But this is all spelled out for you, which I think is so incredible because I know I'm a teacher. It is tough to find time to sit down and think about things, especially when you're starting something new. So this is a great site, trackingsheets.net. It's one of my favorites. I mean, it has everything that you could possibly want. Visual performance skills, which were always really tough for me to come up with good ones. But you've got a ton of those. Interverbals were really hard for me to always have to come up with because you have to come up with so many different questions. But it's got all kinds of fill-ins for you to use. The itsy-bitsy spider went up the water, and then the bold one is what they're supposed to fill in. 5 little monkeys jumping on the, and their response would be bed. Fill in regarding fun. I mean, it just goes through all of these different things, which is so awesome. Like I said, we're busy people, and when you have 20 kids in your preschool class and you have 6 with disabilities that you're trying to create interventions for, it gets overwhelming. So you need all the resources you can possibly have at your fingertips to help you. So let's go back over here. We've got our skills tracking sheet, and let me just show you. This is the one that I came up with right here. You've got your learner's name, the skill that you're working on. So I would either put the milestone or the task from ABLLS that I'm working on. I'm going to include my target. So I'm teaching her, my skill here is tasking or labeling. So I would put the item that I'm wanting her to label. So it might be shirt, pants, glue, crayons. I'm going to include the date that I introduced it, the date that it's mastered, and the date that it's retained. I see some people do retention, and I've seen some people choose not to do retention. I think that that's up to you, essentially. I like to do retention because if you don't, then you might not know that they've really learned something. And basically what I do in a retention situation is the day that they master it, I don't probe it again for another week. So if today little Susie mastered taxing chair, I'm not going to ask her what's that again for another week. And that allows me to see if she's really learned it. If she has kept it for that week, then she should be good to go. So That's something that if you don't want to do that, if you don't feel like you have time to do that, that's something that can potentially go. But I would include that in there just because it's simple. It just takes a minute to do, and you know that they know it. For your mastery criteria, this is something that you'll have to set for yourself, and it will be different for everybody. I had some kids that for mastery for them, it was 3 consecutive yeses. Other kids, if maybe I only saw them once a week, I might bump it down to just 2 consecutive sessions because maybe they didn't have the opportunities to get 3 or 4 in, and they never would have mastered out of anything. In a preschool classroom, I would probably shoot for 4 or 5 consecutive yeses that they get on the first try. That's probably the mastery criteria that I would personally set. But, you know, like I said, it's kind of up to you as a teacher, and I know that that's a blessing and a curse all at once. But you can choose your mastery criteria, but just be consistent and include it on the skill tracking sheet so that everybody knows the criteria that you set for the skill to be mastered, and so that it remains the same for all of her tasking. So that it's not she mastered chair with 3 consecutive yeses, but she mastered book with 2. Make sure that you're being very consistent and systematic in the way that you're collecting this data. Mastery, again, we just talked about the mastery criteria for the target. As far as for a program, that's going to depend on the assessment tool that you're using. The thing that I really love about ABLLS is it will tell you what the objective for the task is. So for G2, which is what we were looking at, the task name is labeling common objects. The objective is labeling at least 100 objects, which are commonly found in the environment. Well, in order to get a 4 on that, which is the highest you can score, the child has to be able to label 100 or more items. So that tells me right there that in order to master this program of labeling common objects, they have to be able to do at least 100. So once they have done 100, or maybe I want to set it above that at 150, then that program can be considered mastered, and hopefully by then they will have generalized it to where they're able to quickly learn names of objects. Like you and I, if we don't know what something is, we can ask, you know, what is that? And somebody will tell us, and we pretty much know it. That's what we're shooting for with these kids, but unfortunately that's not what always happens with children with disabilities. It takes systematic instruction to teach them what things are. So that's how you would set your mastery criteria for the program. So what I mean by program is for that skill area. So this program is called Labeling Common Objects. And in order to master out of that, to move on to the next one, they've got to get at least 100. Graphing, there is a fun graphing website that you can use. It is this Create a Graph, and I meant to pull it up earlier. But you can create a graph on here. You're going to create a line graph. So that's your design. Then you'll select your data. You're going to give it a title, label the x-axis, label the y-axis. You can tell it how high to go, how low to go. So if I want to do G2, down here at the bottom, if I want to do date, up here if I want to do number of targets. So I'm going to graph every week the number of targets that they've mastered. And eventually it's going to be 100, so my max value will need to be 100. and then you get a full preview of it. So it shows you, right here, you can graph it every day or once a week, however you want to do it. So you would put the date down here, and if today they mastered 10, I would graph right here at the 10. So that's just a cool little website that I use a lot to create graphs for a lot of different things. You can create them for different programs. You can create them for behavior. Anything that you could possibly need a graph for, it's right there. I use it in my 4th grade classroom. I use it in early childhood. I use it in ABA, so there's a lot of uses for that. Some frequently asked questions about creating these intervention programs, and particularly in an early childhood setting. There's a big difference in running an intensive ABA program, one-on-one for a child, that you're running 20 hours a week, either in the home or in a clinical setting. There's a big difference in that and in using this as an intervention in an early childhood classroom, because it's not going to be the same. You are not going to be able to run this just like an ABA program, unless, of course, you're trained in that and you have assistants who are there to help you, and they've been trained in it as well, and that's the focus of your classroom. But if you're just wanting to use this to get ideas for RTI and to help you plan these interventions, because maybe you don't have any other ideas, any other resources for planning, and this is the best one that you could find, I would still recommend using this program, but it's not going to be the same as an intensive ABA program. So frequently asked questions would be, how many programs do I run? Well, you're going to want to think about your child, and your kids in your classroom. If you have a child with severe disabilities, you probably aren't going to want to run 5 programs with that child because it's going to be overwhelming. You want to pick the most important things, the most important skills to teach, and teach those. You might just want to run 1 or 2. If you have a more advanced child who's working on the reading skills and the math skills that are in the ABLLS, then you could probably run more and work with them on more skills. So if you have severely delayed children in your classroom, it's going to take a little bit longer to see progress, and you aren't going to want to have them so stressed. You are not going to be able to teach me 20 different things at once, but if you maybe teach me 5 things, I can learn those 5 things really well, and then I can learn the next chunk of 5 things, and the next chunk of 5 things, and then the next chunk, and by then I've learned my 20 things. So kind of think of it that way. How do you know which skills to target first? Well, the ones that are most necessary. I might not want to teach, I might not want to target fine motor skills with a child who cannot respond to his name. It's more important in the early childhood environment that a child turns and looks at me when I say their name than it is that he's able to pick up these with tweezers. So think about what's important for that particular child. Take into account the parent's request as well. Just do what makes sense, I think, is the most important thing to keep in mind. If you're questioning, why am I teaching this kid how to, pick up beads with tweezers, what is that helping him do right now when he can't respond to his name or when he can't say anything? You're going to want to work on those skills before you work on skills that maybe are a little less important for that child. How do you know when they're finished? Your ABLLS is going to set that objective, and it will tell you, labeling pictures of common items. They're able to label at least 100 pictures. ABLLS tells you. The VB-MAPP doesn't get as specific. It will say, like it says, tax a total of 200 nouns and or verbs. So it does tell you on several of them it will tell you, but I do kind of prefer the way that the ABLLS is set up as far as laying out how you know when a child is finished. How long do you work with a child each day? Again, that's going to depend on the level of intervention that they need. If they're a Tier 3 student, you're going to want to work with them a lot. And I always recommend work with them more than what the law tells you to. If you can fit it in, work with them for 40 minutes a day. I probably wouldn't do it all at once with little guys, but work 20 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes there. Get in as much as you possibly can, because the more you do, the more progress they're going to make. And that's just, you know, we know these things. Again, it's common sense, some of this is. And so just think about it. You know, do what you do best, which is teach, and think about these things that you have always known about teaching and about kids and about making progress. As far as behavior interventions, I don't really feel like it's appropriate for me to go into teaching you behavioral interventions because they should be very individualized for each child. But just some suggestions. I would definitely keep data on behavior. Use ABC data, antecedent behavior consequence, which I attached one of those. They're in, it should be somewhere in the middle. Use the barriers assessment from the VB-MAPP. I highly, highly, highly recommend that. It's a great way to look at what behaviors truly are preventing this child from learning. So use that. Collect frequency data. If they're hitting, how many times a day are they hitting? How many times a day are they biting? How many times a day are they running from you? Collect duration data. How long are their tantrums? You know, and as you implement different interventions for these behaviors, of course you want to see that data change. You'll want to see the frequency decrease, the duration decrease. Use the creative graph site to help you create those graphs and collect that data. And just be consistent. And like I said, it's really difficult for me to truly give advice about behavior interventions over the internet. So I'm not going to do that because it's not as concrete as your ABLLS and your VB-MAPP. But those are just some things to think about and to help you get started on collecting that data for behavior for purposes of RTI. I will now kind of open up for questions. If you have any of those, I'm happy to answer anything that you might have or talk about anything. So fire away if you have any of those. Hopefully you will be able to use, especially some of these tools from the internet, which I think are phenomenal. I love to have little cheat sheets whenever I can find them, because it is so hard to come up with targets, and it's hard, especially if you're just starting out. And if this is something new that you're implementing in your classroom. And as somebody who works, you know, if you're working at Vanderbilt, I would recommend using that Teaching Strategies Gold alignment. If you have families, I know that sometimes teachers can be a little bit resistant, at least in my experience. I've met a few who have kind of gone, no, I don't know about your ABA stuff. That's a good tool to have to look at and go, you know, this is what we're doing, and it's working. You know, and this is aligned with what you're doing in your classroom. So that's something that you could, you know, could definitely use in that area. I know that you're not in a classroom, but that's something you could do. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. I guess I will ask one more time for questions and then we can wrap it up. I definitely appreciate you coming out again today. I know that I had technical difficulties earlier this week and I apologize for that. I'm glad you were able to make it today.
Okay. Kaitlin, I don't see any questions.
Okay.
But I want to thank you for today's presentation, and I am going to switch the screen back over to my screen.
Okay.
So just a moment. Okay, so after viewing the webinar today, please proceed to KATC's online learning site to complete the additional course activities. At this point, you should have the discussion board prompt where Kaitlin has written a discussion board question, and you can respond to that, and as well as the post-test assessment. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email. And remember that you must complete all activities to earn the Certificate of Attendance and Continuing Education credits. And I want to thank everybody for participating today. And Kaitlin, thanks again for giving such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Goodbye.